I think we're ready to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending today's webinar, Where Do We Fit In? Landscape Architecture Practice Across the Globe. My name is Karen England. I'm a BCSLA board member and co-chair of the PGA working group. We would like to thank Carla Sarvanino and her team at Alcapool Construction for supporting the refreshments that were available to you today upon your arrival. They are also celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. So for 60 years, Alcapools has been making waves in the swimming pool industry as BC's top swimming pool builder. Congratulations to Alcapool. Some housekeeping notes. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, including questions and comments that are in the chat room. If you don't want to be recorded, please keep your camera turned off and your microphone muted, and use the chat function to submit questions and comments. We are delighted to have today with us Zach Druga, who is with Government Affairs and Advocacy. He's the manager at the Council of Landscape Architectural Registration Boards, CLARB for short. He's going to present on today's topic. Zach tracks and analyzes legislation throughout CLARB's member jurisdictions and prepares legislative reports and communications to keep CLARB members and coalition partners updated on the current legislative landscape. He works to make sure the voices of CLARB and landscape architecture are well represented and keep the profession responsibly licensed. Before he begins, a quick reminder to please keep your mics turned off and to use the chat window to submit any questions and comments. There will be a Q&A session at the end of Zach's presentation, and we'll address those questions and comments then. Welcome, Zach. I'd like to turn things over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here with you today and sharing a little information about kind of landscape architecture practice across the globe, as well as in the United States there. So excited to share some information with you all today. The agenda we'll start with today's presentation is going to be kind of in three parts or three topics. First, I'm going to go over some results from the global job task analysis that CLARB conducted in partnership with IFLA, the International Federation of Landscape Architects. I know you're familiar with the JTA we normally do to develop the content and domains for the LARE, so excited to share some global results as CLARB is beginning a lot of kind of global work, which is very exciting for us. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the US Practice Acts and what our scopes of practice look like in the United States jurisdictions, as well as talking about the work ICOR is doing, developing a practice overlap document for our joint memberships to use. So ICOR, the Inter-Organizational Council on Regulation, certainly a mouthful, but it has the national regulatory associations for architecture, engineering, landscape architecture, land surveying, and interior design. So certainly excited to share with you the work we're doing with that group as well. So as I mentioned, first up, I'm going to talk about the IFLA Global Survey and kind of go through some data we were able to get around what practice looks like internationally, what landscape architects are working on in a number of different countries. So first, just real quick, this is just kind of a small portion of the demographic data, but just to give you kind of a general sense of, you know, who is taking the survey and where at in the world, just to give you a little perspective of the practice areas we're going to get into. So first up, it was offered in 10 languages, with English being, you know, the prominent language that the survey was filled out in, but it was offered in 10 different languages. But a little bit more, you know, kind of diversity in where the survey was being filled out. So although English was the dominant language, the Americas were not the dominant region. Europe and Asia Pacific had the most representation in terms of people that filled out the survey. But overall, I think, a nice distribution there, and certainly, got respondents from a wide swath of the globe there, which is pretty exciting. So a little more information again about who filled out the survey. Does your country have a credential? And again, right, there's different terminology throughout the world. Licensure is kind of North American centric. So, do you have a license, a registration, some sort of certification to authorize you to practice in your country? So almost 3/4 of the respondents said yes, there is some credential available for landscape architecture in my country. Next up, are you credentialed? So about 2/3 of the survey applicants did have the credential in their country that were filling out the survey. And then also, were they a member of a professional association? Again, about 3/4 were. Like we have in North America with our professional societies, that model it was certainly common around the world with most of these survey respondents belonging to a professional association. All right, so that was just kind of a quick overview of who was filling out the survey. Now kind of the exciting part, I'll start getting into the duties and tasks that we surveyed. Are they performing these in their country? So this was kind of the the buckets we looked at here. Planning, right? You can see legal planning, regulations, compliance, master plans, inventory and analysis. So again, consultation, what were you doing with the stakeholders, involving your community, local authorities, design, concept designs, design development, finalizing documents, all things of that nature, as well as construction. So, administration, management, was the landscape architect the contractor on the project, and then post-construction management. So you can see there kind of overseeing, monitoring, evaluating plans and performance in that. So these were the 5 buckets that we kind of, went with in the survey here. So over the next kind of several slides here, I'll just kind of quickly go through each section here, and we can see, what landscape architects are performing across the globe. So the first bucket, again, was planning. So again, kind of around the policies, legal, planning, strategy, regulations. So each of these slides for these areas is going to be how important did they think, this was to the practice of landscape architecture, as well as how frequently are you performing this task, throughout your professional experience. So, this was important to them, and it was also, pretty frequent, or at least occasional. They're doing this type of planning globally. Also in the planning bucket, policy compliance. Again, most of them are thinking this is important or very important, and they're doing it frequently, very frequently, occasionally still. So kind of the similar distribution of the first slide there. Master planning, this is something they felt was very important. And the frequency as well. They were doing this very frequently and frequently. So I think something certainly we think about in North America, developing master plans and that for landscape architects, and something that we were seeing globally as well. They view it as important, and this is a very common function of their practice. Moving on to the inventory and analysis bucket. So looking at the site analysis, again, this was something they felt very important and something they are doing very frequently and frequently. So again, something I think certainly lines up with practice here in North America as well. The impact analysis, again, there's a lot of importance, importance there. And again, kind of that similar distribution we're seeing. They're either doing it frequently or occasionally. So again, kind of everything's still kind of lining up that they're thinking it's important, and it's also something that's coming up in their regular duties as landscape architects. The consultation and participation with all the various stakeholders in that. Again, similar, this is important, and we're doing it frequently or maybe occasionally. So again, something we still see globally. Concept designs. So again, this one very important and very frequent or frequent. So again, you kind of see a little trend emerging here, at least, that what they're doing frequently, they consider very important. So that's certainly good to see that, at least globally, they're doing what they think they should be doing as landscape architects. Design development, again, important, and we're doing this a lot. This one, I guess, speaking towards a little more of the detailed design, but again, they're finding it important and they're doing it frequently as professionals. Same thing here, finalizing designs, very important. We're doing it very frequently or frequently. So a lot of this kind of design concepts, finalizing designs, they're doing that a lot internationally. Again, here, construction documents, very important. This is, again, something they're doing very frequently and frequently. So again, finalizing these different designs throughout the project there. Globally, it's important, and it's something they are doing often. So this one, kind of overseeing the bid process, maybe a little less important internationally, and something maybe they're doing a little less often, occasional there being the top one on this graphic. So again, maybe that still kind of lines up. They're not favoring it quite as much, and they're not doing it quite as often. And again, sometimes this also just kind of speaks to the level of regulation in a country. Sometimes, they need an architect or an engineer to bid, and then they work as kind of a subcontractor under an architect or something of that nature. So maybe this one also kind of speaks to just the different structures internationally, why maybe they're doing this one just a little less than some of the other ones. Construction and administration, again, very important, and they're still doing this one, a good bit, either frequently, very frequently, or occasionally. And then constructing a project when the landscape architect is the contractor, this is very important to them. But as you can see here, something they're not doing a whole lot of internationally. And actually, this one for the first time, we had never out of these slides I'm sharing. Never was the most common answer here. So again, I just kind of alluded to that. I think this might speak, kind of to the level of regulation in a particular country, where again, the landscape architect might not be empowered to be the contractor or bid for the project contract. So I think maybe we're seeing a little bit of that show up in the data here. Landscape management plans. This one, important, fairly important to them. And something, kind of frequent occasionally they're doing, not one of the, highest scoring duties or tasks that they're doing internationally. Overseeing the maintenance activities. This is important or very important. And yeah, they're doing it occasionally or frequently. So maybe they're not quite doing this work as frequently as they'd like as international landscape architects. Monitoring and evaluating site performance. Yeah, pretty similar to, again, to the previous slide there. It's important or very important. They're doing it frequently or occasionally. So again, maybe, an area of practice there's more interest in than they're getting the opportunities to perform. And then this one, looking at different project types. So you can kind of see here, agriculture spaces, energy facilities, green, blue infrastructure, green walls. So there's kind of a variety of different, types of projects here, waterfront, public, private parks, and that. So not too much of a surprise, right? The top ones being, the parks, recreational spaces, community event spaces. public-private properties. So you can, kind of see the full distribution here. But again, it probably lines up, fairly well with what we see practice or project type wise here in North America. So there's just, again, kind of a snapshot there. You can see what types of projects landscape architects are working on globally. And then on this slide here, what is, important to you? What drives you as a landscape architect? What are your values as a professional? And then how does that line up with, the types of recent projects you've had? So, no surprise, sustainability, climate change, resiliency, very popular, or, a common core value for landscape architects internationally. And you can see a lot of their projects, or for the most part, kind of lining up with where their values are. No surprise, the one kind of out of alignment, right? Finances, budget costs, that's, not a core value driving them, but that's a driver for a lot of the recent projects. So I'm sure something a lot of you guys can relate to with the respondents as well there. But again, certainly, something we see, with CLARB membership, what's important to landscape architects, we certainly see that globally as well. All right, so that was just kind of a little overview of what we saw globally through CLARB's job task analysis with IFLA. So again, that was kind of a portion of what we have. There's more, slides, executive summaries, and that. So if there's any, additional interest in this work, I'm happy to always follow up after the presentation with additional information. All right, and then as we saw on the agenda, so the second part of the presentation or the webinar today is just going to give a little information on what we see in CLARB's US jurisdictions membership in terms of practice acts, scopes of practice, definition of landscape architecture. So I'll share some information we have from our US membership side in the next segment here. So first up, just showing a map of the states here. As you can see in the green, Title and Practice Acts, the yellow states, a couple of our friends in New England there only have the Title Act. So for CLARB US members, having a Title and Practice Act is the norm, is the most common form of regulation in our US members. And we'll get to Maine and Massachusetts, don't worry. They're on our list. But again, that's the norm in the states, is to also have that Practice Act protection as well for the profession. So right, practice acts, I think everybody knows, right? Persons are explicitly prohibited by law in the jurisdiction for providing services listed or defined, in the profession scope of practice. So, you can see, this is a good example of the language I just pulled from one of the states there, right? So a person shall not engage in the practice of landscape architecture or use the title, right, unless they're issued registration or certificates of practice as a landscape architect. So it adds that extra layer of protection for the public and the profession, that not only they can't call themselves a landscape architect, they can't perform the duties and tasks that are listed in the scope of practice or the definition of the profession. So an added layer there. So some other common language we see, right? You get authorized to practice landscape architecture, but there's always, some limiting or clarifying language around the related disciplines. So, nothing contained here shall be construed as authorizing a landscape architect to engage in the practice of architecture, engineering, land surveying. Sometimes you see geology, some other related disciplines there. So, a reminder, you're authorized to practice landscape architecture, but you have to respect the other scopes of practice and know where your limits are. But we do see some language allowing for, minor or incidental practice overlap. You can see an example here, minor architectural and engineering design work. Sometimes you'll see, incidental practice or incidental, something, necessary for the project. There's different types of language there that you have a little leeway. You can have some incidental practice overlap, but again, you need to be mindful of the other scopes of practice and, sticking to what's allowed under your registration. So again, we have whatever it is, 48, 49, counting DC, different practice acts in the US. So just kind of a high level overview of, some common language we see throughout the US jurisdictions. A very common one, purpose of the service is for preservation, enhancement, determination of proper land use. That's something we see come up a lot. Certainly language around erosion, irrigation, grading and drainage, aesthetics, references to the natural built environments, again, very common. Something we just kind of covered in the global JTA that we see a lot of here, sustainability, natural features, soils, plant materials, natural resource management, as well as construction, planning, design, preparation, technical services. A lot of the kind of language we see in the JTA, we also see in our practice acts and scopes of practice throughout the US jurisdictions there. So probably, a lot of what you would expect to, what a lot of the language you would expect to see relating to landscape architecture. And then here's just a couple specific examples. The Alaska board is a large multidisciplinary board. It has landscape architects with, architects, engineers, geologists, land surveyors. And I took this snippet from recent legislation in Alaska. The ASLA chapter there had wanted to, kind of strengthen, enhance the definition of landscape architecture there. So here's the example. Again, they worked with the board, they worked with the other professions. So, they got support from the architects, engineers, land surveyors, all that, for this new kind of definition of landscape architecture in Alaska. So you can see, I think, yeah, it's a pretty good one, right? Applied mathematics, physical sciences, consulting, evaluation, kind of a lot of those words, we were just reviewing there. And this is one I did steal the example from, right? And they are also, authorized to do, minor architectural and engineering design work. So here's kind of, an example of what a full kind of definition of landscape architecture can look like in a jurisdiction. This is from Kansas. They had kind of a similar in length definition of Alaska. And then in their scope of practice, it talked about common technical services. They even went as far as then to list out and define what common technical services are, what are considered as common technical services. So a lot there around construction and technical evaluations and research there and that. So they have a lot of information there in Kansas on, the definition of landscape architecture, all these, technical services. So, some of the jurisdictions, they get very detailed. They have a lot of language in their definitions. So that's, certainly, an option. You can be as detailed as you'd like to be. And then kind of on the flip side a little bit, this is everything Nevada has for their definition of landscape architecture. So, a little less detail than some other jurisdictions we see. So again, like everything in licensing, we see the full spectrum of, a couple sentences to define landscape architecture, or, almost a full page of text to define landscape architecture. So, we see a little bit of everything throughout our membership. Yeah, and then one of the other common things was a language around here, design of structures or facilities with separate and self-contained purposes. That seemed to be a common kind of carve out again. We see in the States that for whatever reason, I don't know exactly what that means, is not a landscape architect, but they say that falls within architecture or engineering. So just again, another example. After the webinar, I'm certainly happy to share any more specifics or any additional information, but for today's purposes, just certainly wanted to give a little overview as well as a couple examples. But again, we have about 49 examples in the States, so certainly a lot more out there than I just shared. So what are some other common things we see in the US kind of related to regulating the design professions? A number of states have what they generally call a joint practice committee, where members of the landscape architecture board, the architecture board, the engineering land surveying board, they meet regularly, talk about, regulation, practice issues. What are they seeing in the different professions? Are there emerging areas of practice? How are the boards responding? So again, it's a good model to engage with the related design disciplines, know what's going on in the different professions. What are they seeing? How are they responding? And it just, builds relationships between the different professions in these states. And it certainly helps too, whenever there's legislation, maybe a regularly scheduled review of the board, being able to go to your related professions, the architects, the engineers, whatever, and have support in defending your license or making changes for the profession. So again, just having regular ongoing interactions with your allied professions always proves beneficial. And I, again, kind of got to that second bullet there already. Again, just having communication between the boards, but as well as the professional societies. So we encourage that as well at the board level with the Joint Practice Committee, and as well at the professional society state levels as well, encouraging them to work with their allied professional societies. And we certainly work at the national level as well. CLARB is always working with the other national organizations for our related design disciplines. And I'm going to talk about some of that work in a little more detail in the next section here. And then what we see though is landscape architects always still need to educate, right? There's still misunderstanding between architects and landscape architects, engineers, landscape architects. What do landscape architects really do? Not every related design professional works regularly with landscape architects. I know like this came up in New Hampshire. We're talking about merging with the architects, and for whatever reason, the architect board members in that state didn't know what landscape architecture was. They don't regularly work with landscape architects, as practicing architects and that. So, it took, showing up to the architect board meetings and, having licensed landscape architects there to, engage them, kind of walk through how their licensing works, how it's like theirs, what their practice looks like. So, yeah, we still see that even in the design world, there's maybe a lack of understanding about the profession. So, again, it just kind of gets to the first two bullets there. You got to engage with the other professions and always keep educating what the profession is. Because again, even in the design world, we see a little bit of that as an issue. So we certainly encourage our members to interact with the related disciplines. And then just a little kind of overview of the US membership structure for CLARB member boards in the US. 10 states have kind of these large multidisciplinary boards: architects, engineers, geologists, land surveyors, interior designers. Some of these boards can regulate about up to like 8 professions. 12 states regulate landscape architects with architects and/or interior designers, as well as a number of boards that fall under this kind of agency umbrella model, where they're not a standalone board with full autonomy. There's kind of that agency aspect overseeing, and they'll have the same staff, the same executive director, same board secretary for architects, engineers, landscape architects, and that. So what we're actually seeing in the US and CLARB membership, going away from kind of that standalone autonomous landscape architect board, what we're seeing, legislatively and politically, is to consolidate, to regulate like professions together, or again have kind of agency staff administering or regulating these boards together. So certainly a trend we're seeing. They don't just want one profession, one board. They want everyone kind of together that should be together. So something we're definitely responding to in the States. All right, and then the final section here of the presentation today is going to be the ICOR practice overlap. So again, as I mentioned, this is a organization that CLARB is a member with that has the national regulatory organizations for architecture, engineering, land surveying, landscape architecture, and interior design. So what we kind of refer to as the design disciplines in the States here and kind of our membership. All right, so first up, kind of just go over the background of kind of where this project started. ICOR discussed what has been a long-standing and challenging issue of overlapping practice back in 2020. This issue gets a lot of attention because it can cause a lot of confusion for the public, questions from code officials. Can a landscape architect do this? Is it only for engineers? And just kind of the different professions, right? Everyone's a little territorial when it comes to scopes of practice or definition of a profession. So NCARB originally launched a practice task force back in 2020. And then this ended up growing to include the full ICOR membership and the full ICOR group. So after kind of conversations back in 2020, pulled together this committee to begin looking at this issue. There's a diverse mix of members, executives. We had people from standalone boards, multidisciplinary boards, different regulatory structures. So back in its first year, the task force reviewed different definitions of incidental practice, kind of looking at the pros and cons of what's currently being used by jurisdictions. Additional background research. We used the Venable law firm that CLARB, NCARB, a lot of our partners use here in the States a lot. And then in the second year, after completing the research and kind of doing the review of, again, what's kind of already on the books for practice overlap, they concluded there should be a larger effort led by ICOR in making sure there were equal representation from all the design disciplines to collaborate and build out this resource on practice overlap. All right, so what were kind of some of the inputs? We wanted the subcommittees to focus on areas of practice overlap. So, to kind of identify those areas, what are the education standards for the different professions? Specifically, what's in the accreditation standards for their educational requirements? What are the domains for each of the exams? So what are you learning? What are you being tested on? And then, of course, what are the experience areas or categories required in each profession's experience program. So again, right, kind of falling back on those 3 E's, as well as, surveying our memberships to get input from practitioners as well. All right, so kind of the charges and structure for the steering committee. You know, the group recognized there are natural overlaps of practice between the design professions. So the goal with the task force, develop a uniform guideline and definition for competent overlap of practice. You know, again, addressing this jointly and seeking organizational commitments to adopt the recommendations. So there's the steering committee is kind of the decision-making body, right, for achieving the task force outcomes. Again, equal representation from each organization on the steering committee, you know, involving diverse practitioners, organizational leadership, professionals, executives for these licensing boards, and then the subcommittee, you know, kind of falling under that steering committee. That's where the SMEs are within each profession in the practice domain. So subcommittees working together to identify the areas of practice that are acceptable for practitioners from different disciplines to overlap, as well as those areas that kind of constitute on encroachment, kind of drawing the line where now this is starting to fall within only one profession scope. All right, so some key accomplishments here. January of last year, they completed reviewing all those inputs we went over, identified 3 areas needing no further review. So, you know, not a HSW component, you know, not something that falls under kind of the regulated scope of a profession. Areas of collaboration between the professions, as well as overlap requiring review by the subcommittees. May of last year, the subcommittee, you know, did additional work there, areas of acceptable overlap. So again, what are they agreeing that yes, a landscape architect, a civil engineer, or an architect could, you know, anyone could do this area of practice. Again, finding out the areas where they want to kind of draw the line of distinction that no, this solely falls under landscape architecture, this solely falls under civil engineering, you know, whatever the case may be. And then in January of this year, having an initial report presented to ICOR leadership. So again, this is still ongoing, still being developed. So as it continues to kind of take form and I have more to share, I will certainly make sure you all receive you know, everything that this group is developing, because I know everybody's really excited about this as a resource, giving a lot more detail on overlapping practice. And I know it's going to come as a shock to everyone that getting professionals from all these different professions talking about overlapping practice and scope of practice for the professions is taking a little longer than we initially hoped or initially had in our timeline. But it's certainly developing, and I know I've been hearing a lot of good things about the work the landscape architects have done with the architects and civil engineers and that. So that is one good thing about the profession, is we always do get a lot of good volunteers to represent the landscape architecture profession. All right, so what's in the report? There's a total of about 130 potential areas of overlap that were reviewed by the steering committee and discussed by the subcommittees there. So areas needing no further review. Again, no overlap was identified, or the content area wasn't really that related to the project or to HSW. Areas of collaboration between them. So again, content areas of practice where they can collaborate within appropriate licensing boundaries. And then again, areas needing further review by the subcommittee. Areas of overlap will be reviewed by the respective subcommittees along with documentation so that they may conduct a more detailed review and analysis. So again, you know, some practice areas that need a little additional flushing out to kind of get agreement there if it's appropriate practice overlap or, you know, if that's something that belongs to one profession. So where are we kind of going? What are the upcoming phases here for this project? We're still in the development feedback phase, excuse me, that was the last phase. Kind of doing some initial sharing with members, draft definitions. We're in the member engagement phase now, so finalizing those definitions, resolutions, model language updates, and then we're going to have these go before our different organizations at our annual meetings. And then obviously, ending with the implementation plans. So yeah, that's a little general overview there. So again, we're still in the midst of this. I wish I had a little more detail to share at this time, but certainly more to come. And I will, certainly follow up with BCSLA to make sure everyone, has access to all the information and resources being produced by ICOR. But we do have a website for the organization right now. So, feel free to take a note of this, bookmark it, check in on it from time to time. This is where, any updates, information, finalized resources and that will be housed. And you can also, explore the previous work the organization has done as well. So there's the website there. Again, keep that in mind and, check it from time to time, but I will certainly let you all know as this resource continues to be developed. But again, exciting work, again, kind of starting at the national level, and then it'll, kind of trickle down to our memberships. And then, yeah, just quickly, some next steps. There's a ICOR webinar coming up next month, where it will give the latest update to our joint memberships. So certainly make a note of that. And then again, these will be coming to our annual meetings. So if you do attend the CLARB annual meeting, you should have more exposure to it then as well. So again, some really exciting work. I think we're making a lot of progress. And yeah, please stay tuned because we're certainly excited for the finalized product. All right. Well,
Thank you very
that
much. Yeah. Thank you very
absolutely, yeah.
much. That
Sorry, that was a lot of talking. So I'll shut up now and see if there's any questions.
This is the time where we can take questions from the floor. There's a roving mic that if you put up your hand, you can ask a question and Ryan will come to you with the mic. And for those that are participating online, this is the time to type your chats in the chat box there.
A question here. In the states that have practice acts, precludes anyone who's not a landscape architect doing landscape architecture. So the question is, how do you deal with, because I know in the states, some states, a very large percentage of the registered landscape architects do residential landscape design, almost entirely. That's their scope of work. And so do the landscape designers, almost exactly the same scope of work. So where you have a practice act, how do you deal with the landscape designers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, depending on the scale of the project, I guess, but a lot of, I think the residential practice doesn't fall kind of under a lot of the same kind of HSW scope and kind of, language that we see. Because again, yeah, a lot of that work can be done by a landscape designer, kind of an unlicensed professional. So again, the regulated scope is really trying to get at, protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. So again, kind of those narrower, smaller residential projects, a lot of that work probably doesn't fall kind of under the regulated practice of landscape architecture. Again, kind of allowing, unregulated professionals like a landscape designer or contractor, whatever the terminology is, they generally can kind of do a lot of that residential work.
The next hand I saw was Steve's hand.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. At the beginning, you talked about landscape architect duties and tasks. There's quite a list: planning, inventory analysis, design, construction, post-construction. There's one aspect that you just sort of glossed over, the construction aspect. And you presume that the presentation, you presume that LA landscape architects as contractors. Now, that actually seldom happens in my experience. Mostly the landscape architects are involved in contract administration, construction management, field reviews, managing subs. So I'm just curious why you kind of spent quite a bit of time on the other aspects, but on the construction part, you just kind of passed over very quickly.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a landscape architect myself, so I probably don't have as much of the kind of technical knowledge as to what exactly those questions were getting at to the practitioners. But to your point there, I think the data kind of lined up with your assessment there. That the most common response to landscape architect as the contractor never was the most common response to that one. So I think, that kind of reflects what you were saying is what we kind of saw internationally, that that was not a common aspect of their practice. But I'm happy to kind of follow up with Rebecca, who does our JTAs, and Matt Miller, our CEO, who leads our global work, to see if I can get kind of any more additional information around the construction piece for you there.
I have a question in the chat from Bev Winjack. She's asking, I said, although it's not the focus of the talk, I was interested to hear DC had its own practice act. Why? I'm wondering if if Canada or BC need something similar and would like to know more about it.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the question. Why they have a practice act?
Yeah, why does DC have its own practice act?
It's its own separate jurisdiction. So they're actually, I think, the last U.S. jurisdiction to get licensure for landscape architecture. But yeah, I mean, it's a distinct jurisdiction there. The DC Council, governs it. They have their own laws and regs in DC there. So just like a state, they needed, practice act for the profession and needed to obtain licensure, just like they would in any other state.
Any questions from the floor? There's none in the chat. Patrick.
The last part of Bev's question was, does BC need a practice act? Karen, maybe you'd like to ruminate about that as it relates to our ongoing activities with the other regulators under the PGA.
I could. We are as you know, the BCSLA is transitioning to governance under the Professional Governance Act. There will be upcoming discussions with the other regulators to talk about areas of practice, to see where our reserve practices, our regulated practices, and where I'll use the terminology that Zach used, where there are areas of overlap and collaboration with other regulators. So we'll have clearly defined scopes of practice. So we are transitioning to governance under the PGA, and there will be conversations about overlap of practice with other practitioners. I guess looking for an example of another jurisdiction in Canada that has its own system of governance, its own jurisdiction, similar to DC, it might be the National Capital Commission in Ottawa. Back to Bev's question. As far as I know, they don't have anything similar to what DC has, but it's a jurisdiction of its own within a larger legal framework, another provincial framework. Yes, question.
Hi there, I might have missed it, but my understanding is that the ICOR document is going to be available for view to the general public or general membership in 2025. And at that point, there potentially is an opportunity to provide comment at that time. But at that time, is there an ability to make changes to the document? For example, so obviously you've had a lot of discussion about, scope of practice, shared scope of practice, that kind of thing. And if there is comments from the general membership regarding disagreements to shared scope of practice or additional scope that we think should be added, is there an ability to make a change to the document at that time?
That's an excellent question. I will have to check on that. I am not sure what the cutoff is for. They're going to kind of say this is the resource and we're not taking any more changes. But it will be interesting because we do want all of the individual organizations to adopt this document. So I don't know all the other organizations kind of process there, but if there's any opportunity there, but I can certainly check with my colleague who's on the committee there and get you a better answer.
We have a question online. Curious to know what the timeline looks like for transition to the Practice Act in BC. I think there's probably a lot of people in the room that have a similar question, because I can see you all smiling. I would say that there's a lot of work that's ongoing, and you'll hear a lot about it in the reports that'll be coming up later at the AGM today. A lot of good work's been going on. If I had to guess and no one were to hold me to it, I'm looking at Patrick to see if he's going to yank the mic, and he's not. I would say maybe here he comes. End of 2025, 2026, perhaps. Part of it depends on the government. We need the government to approve our regulation under the PGA. And as you know, when there's an election, as there is this year, the government shuts down and stops making decisions in the summer and is not available again to start making decisions again until like January the following year. So part of it's up to us and how fast we can move, and part of it's up to the government and how quickly they can move. Patrick, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, from what I know, Karen, I would concur. In terms of how fast we're moving, I think we're in very good shape. Within a few months, we'll have, and I mean that a few months, a couple of months, we will have the complete new set of bylaws that we need under the PGA, written, reviewed by the lawyers, approved. So we're in good shape to make the transition. But in terms of how fast governments can move and the influence of upcoming elections and so on, I agree with Karen. We're looking hopefully at 2025, 2026, which is longer than we'd hoped, longer than we expected.
Any other questions? I was taught it's good to wait for people to be uncomfortable before you. I think I've reached that moment. Being no more questions, I think what I'll do then is thank Zach very much for his time today and for making time to speak to us. I found it really interesting that it's the values that align. The reason that people come to landscape architecture seems to be because their values align so strongly with the work, which I find heartening. I'm sure that most of us here feel that way too. And it's nice to see that our colleagues around the world feel similarly. And I especially appreciate your conversations, your input about talking with other regulators about how the conversations about overlapping and collaborative practice, because that research will be helpful to us as we start to enter into our own discussions with the other regulated professions this summer. Yeah. So thank you very much for making time for us today. Zach, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. It's my pleasure. Hopefully I didn't take up too much of your time, but again, please feel free to follow up for any additional information or any questions you might think of after the fact.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the webinar portion of the program today. Remember to watch the Friday file. There'll be an e-news posting about a recording for when it's available. Thank you very much for joining us today. And it's my duty and honor now to introduce Patrick, Mooney, who is going to lead the Clive Justice Book Awards for newly licensed landscape architects. This is always my very favorite part of the AGM. I'm really looking forward to this.